This tutorial describes one possible solution as to why you may be having difficulty disengaging your clutch on your classic Mini Cooper. One thing that may be causing difficulty is that the primary gear, which your clutch is attached to, could be interfering with the flywheel that goes onto the crankshaft. So this tutorial goes through this issue here, so I'm going to assume for a minute that if you did have difficulty with clutch disengagement, you looked at the obvious things like the throw on the clutch arm, the hydraulic slave cylinder working properly, proper setting on the throwout arm, and all those obvious things. I'm going to assume that you've looked at all those and that everything has worked well there, but you're still having trouble with clutch disengagement, meaning when you step on the clutch you have difficulty putting it in gear. So let me show briefly what could be interfering, causing some interference and preventing the clutch from working properly. So at the end of the crankshaft, when you're putting the car together, there's a bronze washer that goes on over the end of the crankshaft before the primary gear. This is a primary gear. And then there's a retaining washer. And then there's a circlip. And the circlip holds the retaining washer in place. And it is essentially there to hold the primary gear in place. And you'll see that there's a little bit of a play. There should be 5, 6, 7, 8 thousandths free play back and forth on here. That's fine. What can happen though is as a flywheel, when you're doing assembly, as the flywheel gets pulled onto the taper, as you're torquing the flywheel up, the flywheel could potentially pull so far up the taper that the inside of the flywheel pushes on this retention circlip, which actually pushes onto the primary gear and prevents the primary gear from rotating freely. So instead of being able to rotate freely like this, if you put so much pressure on it because the flywheel comes up the taper so far, it actually is fused to the flywheel. Fused to the flywheel and the crankshaft and rotates with the flywheel and crankshaft. Remember, the clutch disc is splined to the primary gear. So when you step on the clutch, the crankshaft continues to rotate, but the primary gear stands still and the clutch stands still. And the reason you want that to stand still, with the primary gear standing still, the gearbox won't be rotating, and so you can put the car into gear smoothly. But if the primary gear spins, that means the gears in your gearbox is spinning. That means you're going to have difficulty putting it in gear. So again, what you want to do is make sure that this primary gear always has the ability to spin freely. And again, what happens is that if the flywheel comes too far up the taper, it could put pressure on the primary gear and prevent it from rotating freely. Now, the flywheel has the taper, and it has a recess right here in the flywheel. And this recess actually is what holds the circlip from falling out. So if you put the flywheel on here, you can see there how the circlip fits up into that recess, and that's what prevents that circlip from falling out. But if the flywheel, as it gets torqued up, comes too far up the taper, it can actually push on that circlip and prevent the primary gear from rotating freely. So what you do is remove the flywheel and machine down the surface, maybe like 10 or 15 thousandths. There's a lot of taper there, so if you go down too much, it really doesn't matter. So I'd take 10 or 15 thousandths off of the inside here, and that will make sure you have enough clearance when the flywheel is all the way torqued up between the inside of the flywheel and the primary gear. Now, The clutch may work good when the car is cold, but as it heats up, as the car heats up, the primary gear and the washers and the circlip and the flywheel and everything could expand a little bit. That's why when people have difficulty putting gear when the car is warm, that means this all kind of expands a little bit. Let's say you don't have your 5 to 10 thousandths free play here. All of a sudden that gets kind of less free play. And let's say you're pushing on this washer too much because the flywheel's up too far. It could really prevent this gear from rotating freely. So that's why when the car's warm, it tends to have more problems. I've had this problem happen several times, and so what I've gotten a habit of doing is machining down the surface on the inside of a flywheel right off the bat, and then made sure when I did assembly that there wasn't an issue. So again, one potential solution to clutch disengagement problems, and as I mentioned before, this assumes that you looked at all the obvious hydraulic and clutch arms solutions first.